We light this chalice, which transforms wax into pure light and warmth, to remind us of our own living, transforming the stuff of this world into the love and activity of our daily lives. As we remember Karen, may today bring forth transformation in ourselves from grief, healing, from memory, wholeness, from celebration, love. Thank you, Mary. Thank you all for coming today, and those who are joining us on Zoom from other parts of the country. If you are on Zoom, if you could mute your microphone during the service, unless it's the time in the service when you might be called upon to speak. When asked to define success, Unitarian minister Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote, "To laugh often and love much, to win and hold the respect of intelligent persons and the affection of little children, to earn the approbation of honest critics, to appreciate beauty always, whether in earth's creatures or human handiwork, to have sought for and found the best in others, and to have given it ourselves, to leave the world better than one has found it, either by a cheery letter, a garden patch, or a redeemed social condition, to have played with enthusiasm, laughed with exuberance, and sung with exultation. To go down to dust and dreams, knowing that the world is a wee bit better, and even a single life has breathed easier because we have lived. That is to have succeeded." Welcome, family and friends. We have come together today to mourn and also celebrate the life of Karen Eileen Frank Goldman. Preacher's kid, tomboy in braids, member of the drama club, choir and scouts, respected educator, cat lover, explorer of the woods and water, competitive marathoner, beloved sister, friend and aunt, devoted Unitarian Universalist here at Eastrose, a loving and much-loved woman, imbued with curiosity, an expansive mind, and a generous spirit, who succeeded in every way defined by Emerson. A woman who leaves behind something of her abiding presence, her kindness, her optimism, her resilience and determination and nobler self, something beyond all time, something vital in each of us gathered here today. And while it is good to grieve, we gather also to lift up and express our gratitude for those deeper things about Karen that will never pass away or lose their vitality, but will remain an inspiration forevermore. We stand with our present sorrow and our glad memories of Karen in the presence of an impenetrable mystery. By our attendance here in the sanctuary, we pay tribute to her and express our love and support for one another. So we have come together. It is right and fitting that we have come together because we need one another in empathy and consolation, and we need one another in courage and wisdom to face Karen's death and celebrate her life. It is right and fitting that we have come together because a human life is sacred in its being born and in its dying. We'll be singing several hymns together today. The first one was a favorite of Karen's, Spirit of Life. Most of you know it, but the words will be on the screen. It's number 123 in the gray hymnal. Please rise as you are willing and able.
Yes, I'm Larry Adams, a friend of Karen. Today we are here to celebrate the life of Karen Aileen Goldman. I'm going to touch on some highlights of her life. Like many of us, she experienced a number of key transitions or turning points throughout her life. Each transition introducing new experiences and new challenges. Her transitions, however, started accumulating a bit early and more quickly than most. She was born in 1939 with the name Judy Frey, F-R-E-Y. This was her first major transition or normal birth, but under abnormal circumstances. Her mother was Odette Frey, a 15-year-old who was just entering senior high school. Her father was a 20-year-old whose name we do not know. The father was sent to jail for his part in Judy's conception. Encyclopedic sources, just as an aside, indicate her historic namesake, Frey, is the Norse god of fertility and dispenser of rain and sunshine. Or the associated version, Freya, is the Norse goddess of love, beauty, fertility, sex, war, God. Was there a Norse god influence in her life? After her birth and after much deliberation, Odette Frey surrendered Judy for adoption to the Illinois Children's Home and Aid Society, another significant transition. At the age of 13 months, Judy Frey was adopted by Melvin Frank, a congregational minister, and his wife, Linnea Frank. Judy's adopted name was Karen Aileen Frank. Her third transition in a very short period of time. For a moment, let's take a step back in history. 2 years prior to Karen's adoption, a boy named Baby Boy Olson, also at the Illinois Children's Home and Aid Society, had been adopted at about 18 months by the same Mel and Linnea Frank. His adopted name was Forrest J. Frank. So 3-year-old Forrest was there to greet his newly adopted younger sister when she was picked up. Karen and Frank shared much in their origin and had very close ties in their lives going forward, starting with their birth in Chicago, Illinois, early years in the Midwest, and beyond. When Karen was 7 years old, the Franks built a cabin at East Bearskin Lake in northern Minnesota and began spending 6 weeks each summer there. Then another family became a major factor in Karen's life. Bill Halfacre was also a congregational minister and a very close friend of Karen's father, Mel Frank. The Franks convinced Bill and his wife, Bee Halfacre, to lease an adjacent lot at the lake. The Halfacres also built a cabin. This close association of families brought Jim and Alvin Halfacre, sons of Bill and Bee Halfacre, into Karen's life. Alvin Halfacre was approximately Karen's age. Alvin and Karen became steady friends and dedicated co-explorers of the lake and woods each summer, and friends for life. I will be presenting Alvin's reflection later. Exploring the outdoors is one of several life experiences that Karen and I had in common. In my youth, I spent an enormous amount of time in the woods behind my home in Georgia. From chasing crayfish in the creeks to surveying the world from perches high in the tops of trees. Time in the woods was my passion and my haven from other complications in life. Skipping ahead, at age 21, Karen had a water ski accident. This resulted in 2 detached ligaments in her left knee, which were subsequently reattached. This was the first of many physical traumas to Karen's lower body. Karen tended to push her limits and often had to accept the consequences of exceeding those limits. At age 22, Karen received a BS degree in English elementary education, starting her 41-year teaching career. That career evolved into primarily teaching special education. I think teaching special education takes a very special person to successfully guide students with such a variety of unique challenges. It takes a tremendous amount of patience, flexibility, and creativity. Some of the things that identified Karen herself as being special. At age 23, after graduating from college the previous year, Karen married Jerry Thompson and became Karen Thompson. A major relationship transition. Her father, Mel, was the officiating minister. They had been engaged for several years and almost immediately moved to Bakersfield, California. Karen had grown up in the Midwest a very conservative region, with a minister as a father, both situations that were challenging for a person testing boundaries, which she did. There were indications that this departure from the Midwest was driven by a need to get away from an environment that she had found stifling. 6 years later, at age 29, Karen started running, long-distance running, including marathons and ultra-marathons. She participated in long-distance running for about 29 years. Running is also a passion which Karen and I had in common. I ran for over 40 years. Starting in high school, I ran several marathons and numerous 10Ks until the age of 62. We often shared memories of our running experiences. She was considerably more competitive in her approach than I was. At age 37, Karen ran the Honolulu Marathon, a marathon she held in fond memory. A bit over a year later, she and Jerry Thompson divorced after 15 years of marriage. Shortly thereafter, Karen married a marathon runner, Bob King, and she became Karen King. Alas, that was not to last either. 7 years later, at age 45, Karen and Bob were divorced. A year and a half later, Karen married Richard Goldman and became Karen Goldman, as we know her today. Her father, Mel, was again the officiating minister. Karen and Richard's photos document an extensive amount of traveling and adventure over much of the western United States. Shortly after marrying Richard, Karen started an intensive search to locate her birth parents. The Adoption Institute provided Karen with some intriguing history and even a handwritten letter that Odette had written to the institution. However, after many months of effort, Karen was not able to locate Odette or her biological father. She was significantly disappointed by this development. In 1997, at age 58, after a marathon, Karen was diagnosed with a disc displacement, a herniated disc, with the beginnings of chronic pain. She was forced to end her running career. She experienced depression, was placed on a different antidepressant, and gained significant weight, an especially difficult transition in her life. In the years to come, Karen would undergo many medical interventions, both physical and mental, that developed into a long period of chronic pain and mental fragility. She maintained journals on several of the major medical and psychological events in her life, fully participating. A long period of chronic pain is another experience that Karen and I had in common, as well as periods of depression. Another place we found common ground. It was evident in discussions with Karen and her relatives that Richard's effort to take care of Karen, trying his best to support Karen with her pain, led Karen to a feeling of being smothered. In 2011, at 71, after 24 years of marriage, Karen and Richard were divorced. At that point, Karen had been visiting Eastrose. In 2011, shortly after her divorce, she officially became a member of Eastrose. That same year, Karen, Michael Schillmoller, and I started having breakfasts at Sherry's restaurant each morning before Sunday services at Eastrose. These breakfasts started out from my attempt to establish a Finding Joy group. We were the only ones that came. Fairly quickly, these meetings became dedicated mutual support meetings. We would do check-ins, ask questions, and provide feedback. We did this consistently for 10 years or so, sharing our concerns and experiences. The pandemic ended those meetings, but not our continuing association. One of the persistent themes that Karen expressed in our check-ins was her feeling of having been taken care of throughout her life, from childhood on. She felt she had been denied managing some significant aspects of her life, such as financial management. She seemed to have had an uneasy balance between managing her own affairs and having those affairs managed by others. Another persistent theme during the time we knew her was that every time she suffered a setback, she stood up again and moved forward, largely of her own initiative, but seeking and accepting help. She made a determined effort to remain independent. Throughout most of the last 12 years of her life, Karen lived at the retirement community Courtyard Fountains. There she was involved in a number of programs and game-playing groups. She helped some residents document their life stories. She made a point of trying to help her neighbors. However, socially, with her more progressive world outlook, she often found it a bit difficult living and speaking her mind in this relatively conservative environment. Outside of Courtyard Fountains involvement, she was involved in NAMI, a mental health organization, volunteered at Snowcap, registering folks for assistance, read physical and digital books extensively, routinely studied aspects of brain anatomy and function, and traveled significant distances outside the living complex on her electric scooter when her body alone would not get her where she wanted to go. Ever searching, ever the explorer. Karen was truly an outstanding person with a remarkable life. I am grateful that she invited me into her life. If you are curious about Karen's history or family, a graphic timeline of Karen's life and a family tree of Karen and her immediate family are posted in the narthex, along with a broad selection of her pictures. Thank you.
specifically requested this music from Peer Gynt, and thank you, Mary, for your wonderful playing. So we are going to hear a reflection from Sharon Wickman, who is Karen's niece, and she is in the Midwest, and we are going to hear from her on Zoom.
Thank you. I'm Sharon. I'm here in Duluth, Minnesota, which is the last vestige of civilization before hopping in the North Shore and driving another 3 hours to the cabin that both Karen and I loved. First, I want to thank Mary for the music today. The selections she is playing from the Peer Gynt suite are the same ones my dad played when he and Karen were young. In the Hall of the Mountain King, which we just heard, was a family favorite, and Karen would have heard her older brother play it many times. My dad affectionately referred to Karen as his crazy little sister. While he was quiet and studious, she was active, adventurous, and a bit wild. My dad's first memory was the excitement of riding the train into Chicago to pick up his baby sister. Karen and my dad were both adopted by Melvin and Linnea Frank. Melvin was a minister in the United Church of Christ, and Linnea was the proper pastor's wife. If you're thinking that a wild child might have a difficult time as a preacher's kid, you'd be right. Karen chafed under the strict rules and the frequent moves as Mel served parishes in Indiana and Minnesota surely didn't help. Karen was ready to move out and put the Midwest behind her as soon as she could. Karen and her first husband, Jerry Thompson, found their way to Long Beach, California, and settled in as Californians. It was during this time that I first met Karen. We were both at the cabin that her father built in far northern Minnesota. I was 5 years old and was immediately drawn to this adult who knew how to play. She had an easy and nurturing way with children. I had great fun following her around and learning as she made Cuisinart rods to help her students learn mathematics. While her marriage to Jerry succeeded in putting miles between Karen and her childhood home, it did not survive the realities of day-to-day life. In California, Karen started running. After she and Jerry divorced, she met Bob King, a fellow runner. For Karen and Bob, a 26-mile marathon was merely a warm-up. They ran 50 and 100-mile races, some of them up and down mountains. The day after their marriage, they celebrated with a 22-mile run through Las Vegas. Their marriage held together through their mutual love of running, but Karen's body couldn't sustain the pace. Back pain put an end to her running career, but her marriage didn't last much longer. In this fragile state, the beginning of chronic pain, which plagued Karen the rest of her life, she met Richard Goldman. Richard was a great match for her adventurous spirit, and they had fun exploring California and hosting their Midwestern relatives. They took long weekend trips to surprise me, once when I was visiting Death Valley, and a few years later when I was hiking in Yosemite. Unfortunately, as Karen's pain and anxiety worsened, Richard's response was to wrap her tighter and tighter to keep her safe. This caused her anxiety to spike, and finally in 2010, after over 20 years together, she broke free. In what I see as her most courageous act, she divorced Richard at age 71 and moved to Gresham to start a new life. Karen and I were never close. We lived far apart, and neither of us were good at long-distance relationships. Whenever I saw Karen and Richard, he did much of the talking, and I didn't have much chance to get to know Karen. So when Karen traveled to Minnesota in 2008 for her stepmother's memorial service, it was the first time that Karen and I had a chance to get to know each other as adults. Karen and I shared a hotel room that weekend and immediately bonded. She shared with me much of the research that she had been doing on psychological and brain work at that time that Larry talked about. She was always young at heart, and we met as equals, recognizing in each other the sister that neither of us had. We continued that connection when I visited her in Courtyard Fountains in 2012. She was eager to share her new life with me, including this wonderful community she'd found at Eastrose. We spent the weekend sharing our life experiences and exploring the beauty of the Columbia River Gorge. The most important introduction of that visit was to her cat, Willie. Willie was one of a long line of Karen's beloved feline companions. She, like myself, often felt more comfortable in the company of cats than humans. I hope that wherever she is now, she is reunited with all of her soft, purring friends. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sharon. Now, Larry is going to come up, as he mentioned, to read the reflection of Alvin Halfaker. Larry?
And this one's a bit shorter than mine. A reflection of Karen Frank from Alvin Halfaker. Karen Frank, my girlfriend, companion, lifesaver from age 8 through age 15. A little background. My father, Bill Halfaker, a congregational minister, and Mel Frank, a congregational minister, were best friends. The Halfakers had 2 children, Jim and Alvin. That's me. The Franks had 2 children, Forrest and Karen. Around 1947, Mel Frank convinced my father and mother, B, to acquire a lease on the property next to them on East Bearskin Lake to build a cabin to use for their vacation time from the ministry and enjoy the peace and quiet of fishing far away from the big city life. The end result provided a lasting experience for their children, spending approximately 6 weeks from the middle of July to the end of August with their parents at East Bearskin Lake. Karen, along with my brother Jim and Karen's brother Forrest, learned about building a cabin with hand tools, no electricity, no electric drills, no radio, no phone, heating with wood, digging wells by hand, building 2-hole outhouses. It was frontier living at its best. Almost every evening, right around sunset, my brother Jim and I would go fishing for walleyes until it was dark with Dad. We always fished what I call the sucker lake finger of East Bearskin Lake. Karen and Forrest would fish with their father in the Alder Lake finger of East Bearskin Lake. The half-acre fishing boat would usually come back with 5 or 6 walleyes, and the Frank fishing boat would also come back with 5 or 6 walleyes. There were some nights that Mel Frank was sure they caught more fish than the half-acres. Just to see if it was true, he would come over after both parties had returned to compare stringers of walleyes. The Franks usually had the most fish. On those evenings that there was no fishing, we often got together with the Franks for a lively game of canasta at either cabin. We all got pretty good at playing canasta. During the day, Karen had her chores to do first thing in the morning, and I was required to cut some firewood with a bandsaw for at least a half hour every morning. Around 10 o'clock, I was free to do what I wanted, which was to go over to the Franks' cabin and see what Karen was doing. My older brother, Jim, would spend some time with Forrest, who was a few years older than me. When Karen and I were around 8 to 10 years old, we would spend our time exploring every inch of the two properties, seeing what the forest had to show us. We found lots of thimbleberries, wildflowers, bees, bugs, nests, and mosquitoes. We also found lots of moss and rotten dead birch trees. We would make a small house consisting of 4 rotten birch logs, sides, with moss for an interior floor. We would sit on the floor for a few minutes and then lose interest in our dwelling. We also enjoyed jumping from rock to rock on the shoreline between the Frank Dock and the Half-Acre Dock, trying to be careful not to step on a frog or slip on a rock and fall in the lake. We were not always successful in staying dry. Another favorite pastime was to use a long bamboo fishing pole with a small hook, fishing with angleworms to catch perch off the Half-Acre Dock or the Frank Dock. If we were really into catching perch that day, we would boat over to the Crocodile Portage, walk all the way to Crocodile Lake, step on rocks to cross to the other side of the river flowing to East Bearskin Lake, and walk about 30 yards down to the small lake created by beavers, damming up the river leading to Bearskin Lake. At that time, there was a beaver house we could stand on and fish for perch. We caught lots of perch standing on that beaver house. After lunch, Karen liked to read a book for an hour or so. I did not like reading, so I would retreat to the Half-Acre cabin to take a nap that I did not exactly need. Later in the afternoon, it was usually time for a swim, usually off the Frank Dock. Sometimes we would row over to the Big Island, to the left of the Frank Dock. In the nearest corner of the waterfront of the island was a small sand beach. We discovered if you dig down in the sand a few feet from the shore, you would find some gray clay that was good for making cups or plates with your hands. As we got a little older, we ventured further away from the cabins. Karen and I were the first to mark a trail over to Ruby Lake. The trail we marked was further developed into a winter cross-country skiing trail developed by Bearskin Lodge. We also put hash marks on trees marking a trail from the narrowest point between Alder Lake and Rocky Lake. There were traces of a logging camp at that site near the shore. We would cast daredevil spoons, a type of fish lure I found out, off the shore of Rocky Lake and had lots of northern pike following our daredevil spoons. When we were older, Karen and I also enjoyed boating down to the Bearskin, quote, original, end quote, lodge to kill time. Look around and purchase 1 pop and a candy bar for around 45 cents, and then come back. Finally, the annual East Bearskin Cabin Association annual picnic was a highlight event that took place in August and was hosted by various Bearskin Lake cabin owners. We enjoyed that day visiting with other cabin owners and their families and hearing stories and jokes they wanted to share. In closing, the reason I felt Karen was my lifesaver, and I am sure she felt I was her lifesaver, is that it can get a little old spending all your time in the woods with only your mother and father to communicate with and be with for 6 weeks, without having children your own age to hang out with, to explore and do stuff, for sure. But on the other hand, my time spent at East Bearskin Lake was a life experience I will forever cherish to the day I die and see Karen again. Alvin Half-Acre.
Thank you, Alvin. I think Alvin might be joining us on Zoom. And then Michael Schildmuller has our final reflection.
Hi, folks. Yeah, I've been a member here at Eastrose since about 1993, and as Larry's just explained, Karen became a part of my life in about 2011, a couple of years before my retirement. That's when Larry created his Joy Exploration group, and it was, as he explained, initially the three of us, and ultimately just the three of us. The purpose was to explore the topic of joy, but as we quickly discovered, the check-ins were as interesting as the topic. And it was significant, perhaps, that Larry was really the scholar on the topic of joy, and the only thing that Karen and I could really contribute were our personal experiences, but those became progressively more and more revealing. Larry's provided a lovely overview of Karen's life up to the point where we started our little group. So what I hope to share with you was a little bit about Karen's life after that point and how important she was to me as a friend and as a teacher. I think that her struggles and her triumphs hold important insights into who she was. And before I begin, I'm going to mention that while all of this was shared in strict confidence while Karen was alive, I believe that she'd be very proud of how she overcame her troubles. She was insistent that her body be used for medical research after death, and she was very generous in this way and was often thinking about how she could help other people. And I think she would want others to benefit from how she faced her difficulties as well. Larry's alluded to some of the challenges that Karen shared with us. Karen would often mention a feeling of deprivation in her childhood, a self-consciousness about being adopted. She mourned the loss of the joy that running had given her after several injuries in middle life began to limit her activity. I think that her 3 divorces perhaps contributed to the sense of loss. When we met Karen, in some ways, she was just starting a new life. She was intelligent and charming, but freely admitted that she let her husbands do a lot of the tasks that required some heavy lifting, such as managing money, organizing daily activities, and using technology. And yes, it wasn't lost on Larry and me that we may have been cast somewhat into this caretaker role that her husbands had previously served. Some of the choices that Karen made, I think, reflect her compassion for those who also lived with deprivation. She loved being a teacher and considered herself especially skilled helping children with disabilities. What Larry and I learned during the first year of our group check-ins, however, was the depth of the wounds her feeling of deprivation had left. We found out that she'd been seeing a psychologist for several different disorders ranging from anxiety to depression to some compulsive behaviors. Larry mentioned that Karen was a spokesman for NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, during this time, trying to help other people who struggled as she did. She'd developed a great deal of trust and respect for her psychologist. It was therefore especially traumatic for her when her psychologist committed suicide. All of her feelings of abandonment came flooding back, and to me that was when her recognition, her sense of her physical injuries became more prominent for her. Karen also struggled to make ends meet financially. Her Social Security and teachers' retirement pension premiums from California and Oregon barely covered her necessary expenses. She had relatively small savings, and her issues with impulse control made it hard for her to stick to a budget. However, she could see that without self-discipline, things could quickly spiral out of control. Then in August 2013, Karen had some back surgery performed to treat some of the issues that she had been dealing with, pain issues that she'd been dealing with. This unfortunately did not go well. The surgical area became infected, and the hospital needed to clean the area and do more work. Karen suffered overwhelming pain from this procedure as well, and was prescribed morphine, fentanyl, and oxycodone. From November 2013, a month after I retired, until February 2014, almost 4 months, Karen was continuously in some kind of hospital care. And this was the period when Larry and I made daily visits to the hospital to advocate for her. We discovered that advocacy was necessary based on the cognitive tests performed while Karen was prescribed high levels of pain medication. The staff concluded that she had dementia, probably Alzheimer's. This was a low point for Karen, and she pleaded with us to arrange for death with dignity for her. We found out that because of her mental history, however, that wasn't going to be an option. Karen, however, beat her way out of this very troubled time. She pushed herself through the pain of rehabilitation. With some help, she crammed for the cognitive tests. We cheated a little bit and got passing scores even though she was still heavily medicated. With Larry's help, she took control of her financial situation, her Amazon impulses, her dependence on pain medication, which had by this time become very well established. And over time, she managed to control her impulsiveness, eventually telling us that it was no longer an issue for us. One of the things that all three of us came to realize was that Karen had to do these things for herself. If you suffer from impulse control and a sense of deprivation, having someone take things from you like drugs or money, or try to control you is not a feasible long-term solution. What Larry and I did for Karen was to provide different strategies and provide a sounding board for her coping solutions. She had to make these work. She had to arrange the schedules. She had to make her own choices. She had to evaluate her own progress and make her own corrections. I learned so very much from my friend. Some of this is very practical, such as the importance of advocacy in the healthcare system and the power of breaking down even the biggest problems into small, measurable steps that you can calendar. And some of them you more accurately described as kind of life wisdom skills. The futility of thinking you can change anybody's behavior but your own. The value of reaching out and the strength of receiving help from others. The importance of humor, laughter, and the attitude towards our own circumstances. The importance of good friends who will listen with compassion to your problems. The power of gratitude and of seeking joy every day, everywhere. The surprising gifts the surprising gifts that stem from caring for a friend. Excuse me. Karen provided a model in learning to take responsibility for her choices. When she died in November, it was on her own terms. Her mobility and quality of life had deteriorated. It was a fall, a concussion, and some gastrointestinal issues that put her in the hospital. She took advantage of the situation to consciously decline any diagnostic procedures, She made it clear in the days preceding her death that she was ready to leave and did not want anything but palliative care. She just wanted to be comfortable. I'm grateful and so proud to have been her friend.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you all for those beautiful reflections and remembrances. This is the time in the service where I have a microphone and you can come on up and share a personal memory of Karen with us and with the people watching on Zoom. Who has something like that I'd like to share? You turn towards the cameras. Tell us your name.
Hello, I'm Barbara Raymond. I am also a niece.
This is direction.
Ah, okay. I'm also a niece of Karen's, and Richard was my uncle, and Karen was my aunt. And it's so amazing to hear her story. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Larry. To hear the things, the blessing that she was, because that's how she was for me. That she was troubled, I would have never known as her niece. She always had kind words for me and my children and my husband. Always there. I remember my grandmother, Uncle Dick's mother, came to live with them. And I listened to your stories about how Karen did in her later life. And those are the exact same things that she helped my grandmother with, as my grandmother had dementia. And I would go up and get my grandma and bring her up with me to give them a little bit of respite occasionally. And my grandma was hard, but Aunt Karen always had wonderful, amazing things to say. And always positiveness, always positiveness. Her anxiety and her fear, I would have never known these things if you guys had not mentioned it. Because to me, she was always full of joy, full of teaching people how to have joy, and always complimentary. So I feel blessed and grateful that she was in my life for the times that she was. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Who else has something they'd like to share? Michael? I also think we should restart the Karen Goldman Joyful Breakfast Club. It sounds good to me. Come on in the middle, Michael, if you would. And face the camera.
I just want to pass along that we did reach out to Richard Goldman as well, and he was kind enough to let us know that they spent many wonderful years together, and was very sad to hear about her passing. So he's in Georgia, so he wasn't available to join us, but I thought I'd share that.
Who else has something they might like to share? Jean? For too long.
I'm Jean Wygant, a member here at Eastrose. John and I met Karen one of the first times she was here, and after we had talked to her a bit, and after the service she was sitting out here. I think she was going to call a taxi or waiting for a ride, or we got to talking to her and we gave her a ride home, and it gave us a chance to talk a bit and get to know a little bit more about her. But I really appreciated, Michael and Larry, what you have told me, all of us, about Karen and her life. You know, when I saw that picture, it's the one that's been up here on the screen most of the time, and it's the one over here, the lower one, with the hat on, and that smile, that is the smile I will always remember. That was Karen. And what you said about not knowing about her, so much of her troubles, because she was always positive and always joyful, and that's another piece of what I know about Karen. And to know that she had this as a big part of her along with all the difficulties, is really wonderful to know and inspiring. And Karen, in the best sense of the word, you're a tough old gal.
Thank you, Jean. Who else has something they might like to share? Susie?
Well, as almost everybody here knows, I'm involved with the auction. And one year, I needed people to kind of ask around if they wanted to buy raffle tickets. And Karen said, I'll do it, I'll do it. She's in a wheelchair, but she was wanting to participate and give what she could give. And I was surprised because I didn't think that she would want to do it, and lo and behold, she did. She didn't get a lot of raffle tickets because there was another person also going around, but she did do some, and she did help, and she felt good about that.
Thank you, Susie. I wanted to say before I forgot to acknowledge her caregivers. That was important for me to say, the lovely people, wonderful, caring people who took care of her. And I also want to lift up that despite these difficulties she had around money management, she left a bequest to Eastrose that will make a really genuine difference for us financially. Particularly, it happened around the time of our sewer collapse. And I made the joke that it made sense because Karen didn't take any crap from anybody. So it worked out well. So I want to make sure people know that. I know we will put something official in Petals and find a way to commemorate that very, very generous gift to Eastrose. Any other sharings? Anyone else? Okay. We are going to sing another hymn. It's very characteristic of Karen's life. It's number 6 in the gray hymnal, Just as Long as I Have Breath. Please rise as you are able. Please be seated. Let us join our hearts together in the spirit of life and love. Under the vast spiral of time and space, surrounded by the simple blessings of a community of care and love, we carry these memories of Karen with us. Grant us strength, wisdom, and thanksgiving. Give us strength to speak of our lives so that each day yet to come we find more compassion, more understanding, more of the loving kindness that fills our world with joy and laughter. Give us courage to cherish one another so that we use our lives to heal instead of forget, and leads us to the possibility of forgiveness instead of rigidity. And we give thanks for Karen. Her memory lives on in the great spirit of life that surrounds us, and her memory, cherished by us, dwells deeply throughout us by the person she was and will ever be in our hearts. We celebrate the cycles of life in which we find ourselves, celebrating life at its beginning and at its end, and both always present among us. Spirit of love and life, remind us to love life as fully as we are able. Remind us to treasure our friends and family as she treasured her friends and family. And even though we must bid Karen farewell, the gift of her life is a gift that cannot be ungiven. Let us pause now to gather our individual feelings and thought, meditate upon the meaning of this occasion, and say our private farewells to Karen. Together and individually, we enter into this time of personal memory and reflection in silence. This week, while I was working on this memorial service, I came across a poem called "Pardon Me for Not Getting Up" by Kelly Roper. And I believe Karen would have found it amusing. She writes, "Oh dear, if you're reading this right now, I must have given up the ghost. I hope you can forgive me for being such a stiff and unwelcome host. Just talk among yourselves, my friends, and share a toast or two, for I am sure you will remember well how I loved to sit with you. Don't worry about mourning me. I was never easy to offend. Feel free to share a story at my expense, and we will have a good laugh at the end. The dead are not dead if we have loved them truly. And by loving and honoring Karen in death, the best of her will flow into us, challenge us, inspire us to love, to live, to laugh, to endure, and to dream. Karen, Aileen, Frank, Goldman, rest in the great peace with an untroubled mind and a happy heart. Let us all say, Amen. Amen. There is a reception after the service. Mary will play our postlude.